I want to talk about nostalgia. I was scrolling through TikTok the other day because, well, I hate myself, and I kept getting the same sort of videos, 80s or 90s school nostalgia-inducing images with this song playing. And you know what? They worked. They made me genuinely look back at parts of my childhood with nostalgia. I mean, I didn't have a particularly bad childhood, I did lots of things, spent time with family and friends, I had loads of hobbies. But I haven't looked back at my childhood or teenage years particularly fondly. I didn't really come out of my shell until university. I was one of the weird kids. I wore goth clothes, I dyed my hair black, I listened to metal, I was a bit of a nerd. It wasn't until my mid-teens that I really felt like I found my people. Having underdiagnosed neurodivergent issues probably didn't help, if I'm going to be honest. But why do we feel nostalgic? Why do so many people think of the past as this place filled with sunshine and rainbows? So I did the only thing I know how to do. I began hyper-focusing and started down the rabbit hole. The dictionary definition of nostalgia is a wistful desire to return in thought or in fact to a former time in one's life, to one's home or homeland, or to one's family and friends. The word itself was coined in the 17th century by a medical student observing anxiety in Swiss mercenaries. So essentially, nostalgia is a socially accepted symptom of an anxiety disorder. Kind of. Let me explain. In 1688, Johann Hofer coined the term nostalgia in his dissertation for his medical degree. But his observations are more akin to what we would now call homesickness, a yearning for the familiarity and safety of home. Sir Joseph Banks used the word in his journal during the first voyage of Captain Cook. On the 3rd of September 1770, he stated that the sailors were now pretty far gone with the longing for home, which the physicians have gone so far to esteem a disease under the name of nostalgia, though his journal wasn't actually published until after he'd kicked the bucket. This diagnosis was sometimes major enough that a sailor would be sent home to cure their nostalgia. It was often seen as an insulting diagnosis to receive. It wasn't until the 1800s that it mostly stopped being seen as a medical diagnosis and the meaning behind the term started to change. Because back then, nostalgia was the catch-all name for a range of feelings about one's past, from joy to sorrow. It was from around the turn of the 1900s that nostalgia became the term for feeling fondly towards a person's past. So what can set it off? Well, the diagnosis criteria of nostalgia states that there are three main ways that it's triggered: environmental factors, societal factors, and very rare medical conditions. So certain geographical areas can set off nostalgic feelings, as can certain times of the year. And this makes perfect sense. The first time walking back into a significant building or a town can bring back a wave of nostalgia. And dates and times have always had big significance in their lives. Festivities, celebrations, holidays, birthdays, they all hold memories, good and bad, that can trigger nostalgia. Societal features are the more traditional triggers for nostalgia. Books, TV shows, songs, films, video games, they all hold significance to people. There are entire genres of film, TV, and music that purposely use nostalgia as their main marketing plan. Synthwave artists like Dreamkid, who is playing right now, have a very 80s aesthetic and sound that they reproduce to bring the feeling of nostalgia. Films based in the past, like American Graffiti and Stand By Me and Back to the Future, use nostalgia to entice their target audience. And there's no denying the heavy leveraging of nostalgia that shows such as Stranger Things used to catapult the viewer back to the 80s. For me personally, certain musical sounds will trigger heavy nostalgic feelings in my mind, as will films. Tastes and smells can do this too, be it the taste of a long-forgotten drink or the smell of dust in a storage room. Most of the time, this is understandable. If the music from a significant time in your life enters your ear holes, then of course it's going to trigger a memory of that time. If I play this, I'm going to trigger nostalgia not only for me, but for a lot of other people. The association of sound and music with significant times in our lives is a universal trend among humans. On the other end of the spectrum, there's also a medical phenomenon known as nostalgic depression, whereby a person has depression triggered by past positive memories. It's important to recognise that nostalgic depression is not a formal diagnosis. However, it describes negative emotions that people feel when thinking about their past. It may also refer to sadness when contrasting happy memories with present negative feelings. What got me really interested in nostalgia though is that music I started this video off with. I've only ever heard it on TikTok, so why does it trigger nostalgic feelings? Why do these things that have no significant meaning to me trigger that feeling of wistfulness? I mean, one of the weirder ones for me is the smell of tinned spaghetti hoops and tomato sauce. Whenever I smell that, I'm transported back to when I worked in a music shop selling guitars. Right now I'd like to splice in some video of that shop, but they're closed down. Did I eat spaghetti hoops when I worked there? Probably, but not significantly enough to have such a visceral response. And then, while I was researching this script, I came across a mashup of two songs. One by an artist I didn't know, and one from a video game that I've never played, and I've never felt nostalgia like it. I was instantly transported back to my first year of high school, and there's no reason either of these two songs should trigger that. One was released in 2022, and the other is from a video game that I've never played that was released in 2015, which is 16 years after my first year of high school. Hell, that's 6 years after I graduated university. And yet there I was having flashbacks to feeling so out of place and feeling so damn small. I could feel the tie around my neck, the blazer that was a little too big for me, the stiffness of the newly bought shirt, and the unfamiliar weight of a backpack filled with books for the first time. I could feel the older kids knocking into me in the corridors. I can see the lessons held in the library, smell the plastic of the computer rooms. I can see clay drying in the art rooms and the caustic smell of the acid in the science block. I remember the CDT workshops, the smell of sawdust and hot metal and burnt solder. I remember the stink of the changing rooms, that musky smell of turf and damp football boots. I can remember the sound of the bell that took me weeks to get used to, and the shock of going from spending years 1 to 6 in a class of 18 people in a primary school with maybe 150 students, to suddenly being in classes of damn near double that number and being surrounded by over 1,000 other pupils. But most of all, I remember finding my people, my friends. I remember the first lunchtime battle of the bands I went to when the older kids were playing Smells Like Teen Spirit and diving off the stage into the crowd. I remember rolling up massive snowballs at lunchtime in the winter, hanging out in the shade of trees on hot summer days, talking about bands and guitars and girls. I remember being picked up off the floor by my mates after catching a right hook to the ear in a fight, and learning to be okay with being the weird kid. I remember sitting in classes in year 10 and 11 and 6th form, barely able to hear what the teachers were saying because the ringing in my ears was so loud because we went to see a band the night before, and being sore as hell from mosh pits and being dropped when crowd surfing. Despite me not particularly enjoying my teen years, I made the best friends anyone could ask for. Friends that almost a quarter of a century later, I still spend my free time with. Friends that I would drop everything for in a heartbeat if they need me. Friends who dragged me through the most difficult years of my life, refusing to give up on me when I gave up on myself. These two songs that hold no significance in my life, suddenly bring back that nostalgia, that memory of weekends playing System of a Down covers in my friends' parents' games rooms, recording stupid film parodies before YouTube ever existed, making campfires and ducking out of end-of-day PE lessons to hang out at friends' houses. And then, while I was typing up this script, YouTube randomly recommended me a cover from a song that came out in 2005. A cover that didn't get uploaded to YouTube until 2020. But right there, I was transported back to memories of university, to filming dissertation films with people I was so close to and are sadly no longer with us, to long nights of drunken philosophy with people I've not spoken to in over a decade. Memories of being sat at the window of a bar drinking cheap beer from the bottle, watching the snowfall outside, all while dealing with being heartbroken for the very first time. It was at this point I realised that maybe university wasn't the best time of my life. Those bonds I held so tightly to when I lived a 7-hour bus ride from home didn't really last. But what about life after that? I had memories pop up on TikTok recently with me messing with a 35mm cinema projector, and it whisked me back to those 3 AM finishes, the whir of projectors, the feel of spliced frames in my pocket at the end of a very busy shift, the smell of the cleaning spray and the feel of the protective fabric Xenon covers. It was a bittersweet moment because I realised that on that night a year prior, it was likely the last time I'd ever touched a 35mm projector. That line of work was something I was so proud of doing. I was so happy to be in the cinema industry back then. The industry I left for the second time last year for a multitude of reasons that aren't really relevant to this little video. And then there's memories of newer friends, people I've met through others or through the internet, whose presence I hold so dear, people who I've relied on for emotional support so much and who I value more than I know how to express. So maybe that's why our brains will flood us with feelings of nostalgia, to make us realise that we really did have it pretty good and maybe we could have it good again and not know it. A study in 2012 named Mapping the Aesthetic Musical Emotions in the Brain, published by these people, show that songs that evoke emotions like nostalgia activate various brain regions, including the hippocampus, parahippocampus, ventral striatum, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, as well as the subgenual rostral anterior cingulate cortex, somatosensory cortex, and medial motor cortex. Fuck me, that's a mouthful. So from a purely scientific point of view, nostalgia, like everything else we experience, is just the squirting of chemicals and firing of neurons in our brains as a biological reaction to external stimuli in order to keep the meat suits we call ourselves alive, using past experiences to ensure the continued future of the individual and species as a whole. But it's so much more than that. Nostalgia is that tenuous link to humanity in all of us. It's the remembering of a time when we were going to change the world before the realization that we are tiny, insignificant specks of carbon on a planet spinning at over 1,000 miles an hour. A planet that's orbiting a sun at over 67,000 miles an hour. A sun which itself is moving through a galaxy travelling at 448,000 miles an hour. A galaxy which in turn is hurtling through the vastness of the universe at 1.3 million miles per hour. And despite this, there are over 8 billion people living on this tiny little blue speck. 8 billion people, all of whom have as complex and in-depth lives as yours. 8 billion people who will, at some point in their lives, hear a song, or read a book, or see a film, or eat some food, or taste a drink that will trigger a memory of their past, and will feel that universally held pang of nostalgia. A memory of a time when things were less complex, when loved ones were closer, when meeting friends happened every day, not just every couple of months. And I, for one, think that's pretty cool.
I fell in love with you suddenly.